Western Civilization. How much do you know? My name is Russell Miles and this is the 8th episode of our Western Civilization series. In this episode we're going to look at commerce, communities and sports within Western culture. Civilization might be said to have emerged from trading of goods or commerce. The earliest trade of goods were precious gems, shells, carvings which had been strung together or adorned in some ways. These were highly prized by tribal rulers and others who would trade these from other peoples. For trade to be possible, there needed to be a set of relationships, language, and customs which were understood by varying peoples. That is, a community sharing similar ideals, a civilization. We're going to look at commerce and communities within Western culture, along with how sports became a distinctive feature that spread around the world. The Australian Aboriginals created trade routes connecting peoples across the continent. The goods had to be light and easy to carry, commodities such as bunya nuts, patura, and orca. The Aboriginals were apt at making what they needed when they required it. They could readily identify which stones could be sharpened to make an axe at a new water point so not to have to carry it. They also brought stories which told of resources such as game, water, climate, and navigation. These trade routes encompassed thousands of kilometres and traversed some of the most inhospitable places on the planet. Social capital is a network of relationships among people who live and work in a particular society, enabling that society to function effectively. A simple illustration is to imagine an open field, a group of young men, and a leather bag or a ball. This is as interesting as a gather of people hanging about. Now, add an objective such as to get the bag or the ball to one end of the field or another. Add some rules such as the ball may not be carried but must be kicked or bounced every few steps. This along with an attitude of fair play and respect. There is even more interest if games are arranged amongst different teams. Crowds will gather to watch, they will eat, drink, bet and celebrate. The total value of sports in the global economy is about 500 billion or 6% of global GDP. The earliest team sport was A. Soccer, B. Cricket, C. Baseball or D. Field hockey. Sports emerged early in human history, including games involving sticks, hitting stones or leather bags. In the 12th century, games that involved a ball or bag were played on a meadow, which also involved kicking, hitting and brawls. A number of references that cricket became an adult game contested by parish teams occurred up to the English Civil War. The modern form of soccer emerged as a school sport in the early 1800s. The earliest team sport was probably cricket, but an argument can also be made for soccer or hockey too. Team sports in their modern form emerged in the West and then spread to the rest of the world by trade and colonisation. This is another illustration of Western culture being infused with global culture. We are in, quite frankly, a state of disaster. We are putting a cauldron around the city centre. At this moment, our roads are lifelines. We have every emergency vehicle out there doing what we can. Keep travel to a minimum. Do what you can in your immediate area. Check your neighbours. We must do what we can. Christchurch Mayor Bob Parker, 22nd of February 2011. The Phoenicians were an early seafaring and trading civilization founded in the 3rd millennium BCE. They originated in the Canaanite region, modern Lebanon, with trading colonies in Crete, Carthage and along the Atlantic to modern-day Lisbon. The name is of Greek origin and possibly relates to the colour purple. The indigenous identity, language, religion seems little distinct from other peoples of the region. The Phoenicians developed a 22-letter alphabet which spread and was expanded upon by the Greeks. They might be seen more as a culture of loosely associated city-states related by trade. The principal trading commodity of the Phoenicians was A. Olive oil, B. Silver, C. Salted fish paste or D. Wine. The Greek association of the colour purple with Phoenicians may relate to their providing Tyran purple dye which was harvested from murex sea snails. Purple was the colour of nobility and so highly prized. When snails from the eastern Mediterranean were fished out, the Phoenicians sourced new supplies from far-off Mogador, modern-day Morocco. The Phoenicians also traded in wine, slaves, silver, olive oil, yam, cedar timber, and obtained cattle hides, gold, and cloth from their trading partners. However, fermented fish paste caked in salt and sealed in pottery jars seems to be highly sought after, and trading ports were developed to source this commodity. The answer is probably C, but we really don't know. By the first millennium, the Phoenician Empire was absorbed into more powerful Greek, Persian, and Carthaginian empires. The Silk Road was a network of trade routes which connected east and west, and was central to the economic, cultural, political, and religious interaction between these regions over the first millennium. The Silk Road primarily refers to land routes from Xi'an, China, through the steppes north of the Himalayas, but includes waterways such as Lake Balkhash and sea routes of the Red and Arabian Seas accumulating in the eastern Mediterranean. These were a series of overlapping routes with traders moving commodities between cities. The routes developed over a long period. By 475 BCE, the Persian Royal Road ran some 2,800 kilometres from the Kayran River east to the Aegean Sea. Alexander the Great moved into Central Asia, and by 330 BCE routes reached the Fergana Valley in Tajikistan. The Chinese Han Dynasty expansion into Central Asia in the 1st century BCE connected various routes, including those south to India. These routes were often interrupted by social turmoil and warfare. There is argument as to whether the sea route via the South China Sea to India and across the North Indian Ocean was more prominent. Trade between China and India, as the two most populous and developed civilizations at the time, was more dominant than trade with Europe. There was also significant trade between Arabia and North Africa too. The land route is much shorter than sea, and the small dozhon and dhow sailing vessels were slow and highly vulnerable to rough seas and seasonal cyclonic weather, even if they could carry more cargo. The principal commodity of the Silk Road was Turkoman horses, which were more robust for warfighting than East Asian horses. There was trade of camels for beasts of burden too. The Chinese had a technological monopoly on silk manufacture, which was prized in India and the West. Roman rulers even introduced prohibitions on the wearing of silk at times on public decency grounds and because of trade imbalances. Porcelain was also valued in the West. Wools, gold, jade and silver went east. Tea and spices were more common along the sea routes. These goods were for the social elite, with economies of the time being localised. The West also received knowledge of making paper and gunpowder, with Christianity, Buddhism and later Islam spreading westward. Disease also spread: anthrax, leprosy, the Justinian plague of the 5th century, and notably the Black Death of the 13th century, which caused a decline of up to 2/3 of the European population. The Black Death caused the disruption of serfdom in Europe, as the labour shortage had tenants leave landlords for better paying work. The reaction from rulers fermented the English peasants' revolt in 1381. While brutally repressed, it created the culture of dissidence. In modern times, railways completed the route, and in 1990 the railway systems of China and Kyrgyzstan connected at Ala-taw Pass. In the new millennium, trains have run between Xiutan and Hamburg in a fortnight, compared with over a month by container ship. The Silk Road has had a major impact on Western civilization. From the 2nd millennium BCE, galleys with sails and oars began to ply the Mediterranean and Arabian seas. These ships could carry 5 to 40 tons of cargo 80 to 100 kilometres per day. The more oars, the faster these ships could travel. They included Greek triremes with 3 banks of oars and over 100 oarsmen, capable of 6 knots with a maximum of 8. What was the critical factor that limited how long a voyage a galley might take? A. Sailors' fear from being out of sight from land. B. The amount of water for the sailors a galley could carry. C. The weather. D. The number of oarsmen. The galleys were able to carry more cargo faster than pack animals on land, at about 1/6 the cost. This allowed trade that would not be feasible by land. This is the major reason why early civilizations emerged around the Mediterranean and Arabian seas. They also linked up overland and river trade. The galleys rarely ventured far from shore as they navigated by points of land, not to mention the insecurity of sailors. The gallows were also low to the water and vulnerable, and rarely ventured into the Indian or Atlantic Oceans, and did not sail in rough weather or winter. The oarsmen, whom were mostly slaves, needed to work exhaustively and dehydrated quickly. They required large amounts of water to maintain their effort. The limit to any voyage was the amount of water that could be carried. Prince Henry the Navigator is famous for A. Inventing the Belshila, or cross-staff, to measure the elevation of stars from the horizon. B. Conquering the Moorish-held port of Ala-taw across the Straits of Gibraltar. C. Organising explorations of the northwest coast of Africa. And D. Developed the caravel, a light ship with triangular sails better able to adjust to the wind. Prince Henry the Navigator was the fourth son of the Portuguese King John I. He is recalled for developing maritime exploration, notably the northwest coast of Africa. Prince Henry mostly decided the missions, organised financing and appointed captains. Henry promoted the use of navigation aids, use of the caravel and supporting existing maritime schooling. His father and brothers had led the conquest of Ala-taw. The Portuguese were seeking a sea route around Africa to India and lucrative trade. Henry's stories typifies the Western tradition of adopting ideas from elsewhere and adapting them to emerging needs. The answer is C. The development of maritime technology from the 13th century enabled trade and Western influence to spread to the Americas, Africa, and Asia. The Portuguese navigator Magellan led the first sailing expedition to circumnavigate the globe. Cristobal Columbus was to sail to the New World while seeking a westward route to the Orient. Prior to this, global trade was limited. The sailing via oceans allowed larger quantities to be moved faster. Western sailing ships with cargoes in the many hundreds of tons came to dominate global trade and spread influence. Nelson Mandela was of noble birth, became a lawyer, a black dissident, jailed for treason, and was South Africa's first president under the post-apartheid elections. Nelson Mandela had to deal with a coup d'etat from within the Defence Forces, the armed wing of the ANC wanting to pursue conflict, social turmoil, and a wrecked economy. Sport was not only a major part of international sanctions against apartheid South Africa, but a social divide. Black youth played soccer in the townships, and Afrikaners pursued rugby. The 1995 Rugby World Cup was held in South Africa after the International Rugby Football Board readmitted South Africa to international rugby. To the disdain of black South Africans, Nelson Mandela embraced the World Cup as an act of reconciliation. Then, against the odds, South African Springboks went on to defeat the New Zealand All Blacks. We're going out to play rugby, and that's the way we've been successful this year. That's what we plan to do this weekend. James Horwell, Captain, Brisbane Reds. Our next episode will explore how the West came to dominate the globe, including how America came to get its name. If you like this channel, please subscribe and tick like. You can let me know what you think in the comments below, and I can be contacted at email russmills@iprimus.com.au. Bye, donkey, for listening. Tot ziens.